Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome in the year 67 AD. Marble columns gleam under the midday sun. The scent of incense and roasted meat wafts through the air. But then, a chilling sight stops you cold. The Emperor Nero himself, cloaked in imperial purple and basking in the adoration of the people, is strolling proudly through the forum with what appears to be his new wife. A striking young woman, radiant in robes of silk and glittering jewels, but whispers ripple through the crowd, because behind the beauty lies a sinister truth. That woman, beside the most powerful man in the world, was once a boy named Sporus, and what Nero did to him is considered one of the most disturbing acts of psychological and physical abuse in recorded history. Before we journey into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, please consider liking this video and hitting that subscribe button for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. He was born into obscurity, a slave, or perhaps the child of a freedman, a name unrecorded until it was stained into history. We call him Sporus, though that is not a name but a title, derived from the Greek word sporos, meaning seed. Ironically bitter, since the act that would shape his life ensured he would never sow any of his own. To understand Sporus, we must understand who he was forced to replace. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she was Nero's second wife. Dazzling, manipulative, perhaps even genuinely loved. She died in her third pregnancy. The historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio whisper that Nero kicked her in a fit of rage while she was with child. Whether by miscarriage or internal bleeding, her death left a chasm inside the emperor, a space he sought to fill with a mirror image. And that is when they found the boy. Some say he was chosen for his striking resemblance to the empress. Others say Nero saw him and simply wanted him. He was young, perhaps 13 or 14. Nero would have had him taken, regardless of consent. There was no choice, only imperial will, and so the butchery began. The castration of a living boy was not an unknown act in Roman society. Eunuchs served in Eastern courts, and effeminate boys were paraded in certain elite circles. But this was different. This was sacrifice. The removal of his testicles was not just mutilation, it was transformation. It was, in Nero's mind, the forging of a new Poppaea. The act itself would have been performed by a palace physician or skilled slave. The boy held down, lightly drugged with poppy sap, wine, or vinegar-soaked cloth, the knife cold, the pain incandescent. In most cases, the removal of the testes in adolescence leads to underdeveloped musculature, a smooth voice, and a rounded face. He would never grow to manhood. That was the intention. They dressed him in silk robes. They pierced his ears. His hair was curled and perfumed. Every gesture rehearsed, every word shaped. And then, in the forum, before the eyes of Rome and the gods themselves, Nero married him. Witnesses report a full wedding ceremony, complete with bridal veil and dowry. Nero played the groom, Sporus the bride. He called him Sabina. He kissed him before the altar. The people clapped. This was not love. This was possession made divine. As the ceremony ended, the new empress was escorted to the palace. He would sleep in the imperial bed. He would dine beside the emperor. He would parade through the streets in golden litters and be addressed with the titles reserved for queens. But behind the gilded doors, the pageantry rotted. To understand this fully, we must examine how Rome allowed such horrors to flourish beneath its marble facades. Rome's institutions prized hierarchy above all. The emperor was divine, his will absolute. The Senate had long since been neutered, its oratory silenced by gold and fear. In Nero's court, flatterers flourished and dissenters disappeared. The empire was not a republic, but a stage every act performed for spectacle, every life weighed for its dramatic effect. Within this system, Sporus was a living ornament. His mutilation, his humiliation, his performance as a dead woman were all sanctioned by the very mechanisms that elevated Nero. Priests officiated the wedding. Courtiers toasted it. Poets immortalized it. No law condemned it. Instead, the law bent to accommodate it. And so Sporus, barely a teenager, endured what few can comprehend. His days were dictated by imperial whim. When Nero wished him to sing, he sang. When Nero paraded him before generals and foreign dignitaries, he bowed and curtsied. He was never allowed to speak as a man, never allowed to dress as a boy. The empire had declared him female, and in Rome, legal fictions were treated as divine truth. This distortion bled into his very identity. Sporus began to answer to Sabina. He walked with the gait of a noblewoman. He wept when commanded, laughed when commanded. His body was the emperor's creation, and his mind slowly eroded beneath the weight of that performance. He had no family, no escape, no privacy. Even his tears were performative. What happened next was worse. Nero's madness deepened. The fire of Rome, the purges, the murders of his own mother and tutor were symptoms of a deeper rot. As his popularity waned, his paranoia rose. He took Sporus with him on his tours of Greece, displaying him to foreign crowds, calling him "my wife" with a sickening smile. And always, Sporus played the role. But even as Nero danced upon the ashes of his crumbling empire, Sporus remained bound to him. He was not a partner, he was not even a slave. He was a ghost, given flesh only to ease the emperor's grief. And when the walls finally closed in on Nero, when the Senate declared him a public enemy, and his guards abandoned him, Sporus was still there. As Nero prepared to kill himself, too cowardly to do it without help, he turned to the boy he had broken. "You weep?" Nero asked, bleeding from his throat. "This is fidelity." Years passed, and still the empire found new uses for the boy bride. But even as Nero's corpse cooled in a shallow grave, and the Senate spat upon his name, Sporus lived on, no longer a symbol of imperial decadence, but a human remnant of its collapse. The boy who had once worn the bridal veil of Rome was now passed from hand to hand like a cursed relic. Without Nero he had no protector, but that did not mean he was free. Freedom was a concept that had never applied to him, and the empire had not finished using him. The general Otho, one of the first to seize the imperial throne in the chaos following Nero's death, claimed Sporus next, and he married him. Another public ceremony, another silk veil, another man calling him Sabina, with mock, solemn vows and carnivorous eyes. Some say Otho had once loved Poppaea as well, and that, like Nero, he sought to possess her through the boy. Others believe he simply wanted to mock Nero's memory, to parade his ghost wife before the people, as if to say, "I own what the tyrant held most dear." But Sporus was never asked. His body, shaped by violence, had become a tool of political theatre. The very trauma he carried made him valuable to the powerful men who sought to drape themselves in the rotting grandeur of Nero's reign. They could not bring back Poppaea. nor even Nero, but they could possess the echo of both through Sporus. There was no refuge in Otho's palace. If anything, the performances intensified. The boy was expected to reenact court rituals, dine in feminine silks, and remain silent unless spoken to. When Otho's reign crumbled within months, and he slit his own wrists in a nobleman's villa, Sporus was left once more to drift in the currents of ambition. The next man was worse. Vitellius. Unlike Nero and Otho, Vitellius did not pretend to love him. He paraded Sporus as a joke, a walking punchline. During feasts, he forced the boy to dance for drunken senators. He was made to recite erotic poetry, wear whore's makeup, and simulate acts too depraved to record here, all to the roar of laughter from men whose own faces had once trembled before Nero. What had been religious horror under Nero became entertainment under Vitellius. And so the system revealed itself fully, an empire that could rationalize anything, so long as it entertained, so long as it preserved the illusion of control. Rome was a machine of spectacle, and Sporus, castrated, painted, and paraded, had become its grotesque mascot. We must understand how this system endured. Roman society worshipped power and beauty, but it did so through lenses warped by class, cruelty, and conquest. The elite ruled through fear and diversion. The Colosseum was not yet built, but its spiritual predecessor existed in the palaces and private villas of the powerful, where suffering was a performance art. Boys were commodities, eunuchs were curiosities, and victims were made into mirrors, their humanity erased so their degradation could reflect the empire's own self-love. Sporus's psychological reality was fractured. He was a boy whose body had been arrested in pre-adolescence, whose identity had been overwritten again and again. What does it do to a mind to be told every day that you are not who you are? To have your name replaced, your voice trained to lilt, your clothes chosen for their allure, your survival dependent on performance. Sporus was not allowed grief, not allowed rage. He could not speak of the pain in his pelvis, the hollow ache of hormones that would never flood his blood. He could not speak of the nights spent staring into polished bronze mirrors, searching for the self that had been carved away. We can imagine the coping strategies he must have developed. Emotional detachment, dissociation. Perhaps he created a separate identity inside his mind, a secret place, untouched by wigs and veils. Perhaps he found fleeting refuge in routines, or brief comfort in the quiet moments between humiliations. But even coping has limits. There are hints in the historical record that Sporus attempted to escape, not a physical flight, which would have been impossible under constant surveillance, but social maneuvering. Seeking favour from court officials, whispering alliances, navigating the deadly ballet of Roman politics with whatever influence his visibility afforded him. Nothing worked. Each new emperor treated him either as a novelty or a threat, and every attempt to reclaim autonomy led only to deeper entrenchment in the system. He had no brotherhood, no real allies. Other slaves were afraid to associate with him, perhaps seeing him as cursed. His visibility made him untouchable, but never safe. He was both centerpiece and prisoner. And through him, we see the hypocrisy of Roman culture in high relief. This was a society that celebrated stoic virtue while enslaving children. That debated the philosophy of liberty while turning the mutilation of a boy into a state-sponsored pageant. That produced masterpieces of sculpture and law, yet allowed a system where trauma became tradition. Sporus's continued existence was not proof of tolerance, but of the system's flexibility. He was not protected because he was valued. He was tolerated because he amused, horrified, or symbolized. And when that usefulness ended, there would be no hesitation in casting him aside. But he endured. For a time. His ability to survive, to wake each day and once again don the costume of someone he never asked to be, is a quiet, invisible form of resistance. He could not shout, he could not strike, but he could exist. And in a world so invested in erasing him, that was something. Still, survival was not victory. He was not carving out a life, only avoiding oblivion. There is no record of joy, no friendships noted, no moments of safety. To understand his final days, we must move forward in time. But before that, we pause at the cliff's edge of this second act, because what came next would push him beyond endurance. Not merely humiliation, not merely violence, but the final stripping away of identity. The Roman machine would not let him go. And in its next cruel chapter, it would attempt to turn his death into the grandest performance of all. What followed was not peace. It was spectacle, sharpened by cruelty and disguised as justice. When Vitellius fell dragged through the streets and butchered by rival forces, the Roman world entered yet another spiral of blood. The year of the 4 emperors was not just chaos. It was opportunity for those who thrived in ruins. The general Titus Flavius Vespasian would rise from the east, and with him came a new dynasty, the Flavians. Stronger, more stable, more organized. But for Sporus, nothing changed. With Vitellius gone, the new rulers turned their eyes to house cleaning. Anyone tied too closely to Nero became a liability. Some were exiled, some executed. Sporus, by then in his late teens or early 20s, found himself taken in by yet another man this time, a former courtier named Nymphidius Sabinus. Sabinus, like others before him, had ambitions for the throne, and like others, he used Sporus to feed them. He dressed the young man once more in bridal robes, declared that if he claimed the purple, he too would marry Sporus in a public ceremony, to legitimize himself, to invoke Nero's memory, to wrap himself in the shroud of imperial theatre, as if Rome would mistake rot for divinity one more time. But Rome had grown weary of the farce. The Flavians would not tolerate another mockery of power. Sabinus was slaughtered by his own men before he ever reached the palace steps. Sporus was taken into custody. This time, the sentence was not performance, it was execution. According to the historian Cassius Dio, the method selected was theatrical in the most perverse sense. Sporus, he writes, was to be killed in a public arena by being raped to death by a wild animal symbolic, savage and calculated for maximum horror. This was not punishment for a crime, it was a final joke, a grotesque punctuation on a life that had been nothing but ceremony without agency. Rome, in killing him, sought not justice, but catharsis. And so the boy who had once worn an empress's veil would now die in front of jeering crowds. Another spectacle offered to the gods of violence and apathy. But something happened. Sporus chose his own ending. Before the date of the execution, he found a blade. Some say he bribed a guard. Some say it was smuggled in by a pitying slave. The records are silent on how, but the result is clear. He opened his veins, and as the blood spilled, quietly, privately, he made his first and final decision. He would not perform his death. There would be no curtain call. What Rome had planned as entertainment became an absence. The arena stood ready, the crowd assembled, but there was no victim to cheer, no screams to enjoy. The silence, for once, was his. It is easy to say that Sporus was a symbol, that his life reflected the madness of an empire, the cruelty of absolute power. It is true, but it is not enough. Sporus was a child. He was a child castrated by the state, a child moulded into a lie, a child trafficked through the highest circles of power, stripped of selfhood, dignity, and even language. And through all this, he endured. We must not flatten him into metaphor. His pain was real, his blood was real. His silence was not consent, his veils were not adornments, but shrouds. His wedding was not love, but obliteration, and Rome allowed it. The same empire that built aqueducts, that sculpted marble into gods, that codified law and philosophy, also cheered as a broken child was paraded through the streets as a parody of womanhood. The same people who recited Virgil and Seneca also toasted while Sporus bled beneath their laughter. His death was not tragic because it was exceptional. It was tragic because it was inevitable. And the system that consumed him still echoes. Today, across the globe, we see young bodies shaped to fit the fantasies of the powerful. We see institutions that normalize abuse, that reward performance over authenticity, that punish victims for not smiling through their pain. The names have changed, the titles have changed, but the gaze has not. There are still Sporuses among us, children denied their voices, sculpted into symbols, punished for the sins of those who possess them. And so we remember him, not as an empress, not as a bride, not as a symbol, but as a boy who should have been allowed to grow, a boy who died refusing to perform one final time.